In my V-Ray workflow, I like to start with the simplest possible rendering, which renders in just a couple of seconds. And I like to build up from there. It's important that you separate different aspects of your rendering so that you don't try to figure out which variable is going wrong when you have three different variables in play. It just takes forever to try to diagnose problems in that way. I like to isolate it so that I go through a logical workflow, and that will always lead to a nice solution. The first place I start is by turning off all of the features that take time. Let's go ahead and turn off GI, and also make sure that caustics are off. So basically we've eliminated all of these rollouts from here on down to here. The next thing to think about is the image sampler. The image sampler can take a huge amount of time. The quickest image sampling algorithm is the last one here, adaptive subdivision. So select it, and then set the parameters for that algorithm down here. Set it at the minimum quality, which is -3. Set max rate up one notch so that you have an adaptive subdivision that adapts between the min and max rate. -2 is slightly better than -3. But because these numbers are so low, we're really not going to spend any time anti-aliasing. Make sure the V-Ray frame buffer is on, and go down to the System tab, and for the very first rendering you should see the log window, and turn on the frame stamp. Go ahead and make a rendering and see what you get. So right now we see the V-Ray frame buffer and the log or messages window. Now primarily the first thing you ought to check is to see if you have any errors here. They would be highlighted in green. I don't see any errors at all. That means that the lights and materials in the scene are all okay. So that's great. We've passed the first test. I can turn that off, and I don't want to see that again. I'll turn it off here. The frame stamp feature allows you to put this information on the rendering, and this is very helpful, although there's so much information that it doesn't fit on this tiny test render. Open the frame buffer, and you can see that information is down here in the form of text and variables. You see that? I'm going to highlight a lot of this and just get rid of it. I'm really concerned about the render time most of all. That's what I want to see here. You can add additional information by clicking this button to insert variables, and you can just put these in there and you'll see that information every time you make a rendering. So this rendering just took 4 seconds to complete. Now if you think about it, there's something wrong here, because we're rendering the direct illumination only. And if you remember from the Mental Ray tutorial, it should be very dark in this room. The direct illumination is coming through the skylights and hitting the floor, and that should be the end of the story. We shouldn't see illumination all over the place, because we're not using GI. What we're seeing right here is an image that's way too bright. So we need to correct that first of all, or we'll be wasting our time with all of the other settings that we could make. Go to the Color Mapping tab, and this is where you can control the exposure. There are different algorithms that let you do that. They're right here. Linear multiply tends to burn out the highlights. Exponential tends to lose the saturation of colors, so I like this third option, HSV exponential. Let's render it. the colors look a bit different here, and it's still way too bright. Remember, this is exponential, so the numbers that you change here have a big difference. Let's try it at 0.5 and 0.5. I'm turning down the shadows and the highlights. Gamma allows you to shift the midtones. Render again. It's a bit darker, but we still see way too much color up here. Let's tone it all the way down to 0.1. It could go even lower. It could go 0.01 or something like that. Let's just try this and see what we get. Okay, now that's looking a lot better. This is starting to be a more believable exposure of the direct illumination. I'll go with that. So this is the type of thing you need to do to begin your workflow. Dial in your exposure first before you start adding complexity to the rendering.